You get to play?
Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Hey.
Just remember to pause this now. I'll just play it out. Welcome to the 75th. Needs sharp. Yeah, we'll watch out. No.
Is that true? Is that true? Definitely.
Yeah. I think we started in 2012 in March.
That's incredible.
And we have we always miss out December because the last Thursday of December is not very. It's not a good turnout.
That's really good though. 75.
75.
I've not been to every single one.
Yeah. No. So welcome. Thanks for coming. Lots of familiar faces. Yorkshire Water last time. Was it Yorkshire Water? Jet 2's here. If you want to shout out your company, you can. Any companies?
Like us, Black Light.
Black Light. I was mixing up with Black Marble. Oh, but incidentally, Black Marble was at the first, at our first inaugural meetup, weren't they? Who was it again?
Richard Fennell.
Richard
Yes.
Fennell,
Very
yes,
good.
so nice little segue.
Perfect.
Go on then.
So, one of the things we should ask is if anybody ever wants to help us, actually be part of this, for the next 75, then we would love some help. I mean, genuinely, if you want to help, it really could be anything. It could be getting involved with the social media side of things, or sourcing, or filming, helping out.
Well, fair, I think we've got filming coach.
I think we have, yeah. Or sourcing speakers, just generally helping out or being up front to do this. That'd be great. So anybody who wants to help, that'd be grand.
Writing blog posts, that would be good.
Yeah. So we're still on the lookout for a new venue.
Why is that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, what do you think of this? We've been, you probably noticed, it's been here before, we've been demoted from the lovely 10th floor. Apparently some high-flying solicitors have moved in to the 10th floor. But that was always on the card. They told us straight away that that's going to be rented out. But I'm not sure if we're going to get away with this. Sometimes we've got close to 80 and this has a capacity of 60.
Yeah. And plus, we're limited to the screen size, and it'd be nice to have a projector like we had on the 10th floor. So
and the sofa.
Sofa. So we're on the lookout. It's not a massive priority right now, but if anybody knows of any venues, then that could be grand.
Yeah. But what's your take on? Is it a factor for you that it's close to the station? Yeah, hands up. Anyone? Yeah, it is. Yeah. So if it was further away from the station, there'd be, you might not come.
Have the numbers improved since you
They have. Yeah, the numbers have improved.
Depends how far from the station.
There have been a couple of venues we've looked at. One of which is quarter of an hour from the station, sort of Holbeck way, and another one 10 minutes Holbeck way. Is that
Jet 2?
Jet 2.
Offered.
Yeah. But it'd be nice to keep it more central, so there wasn't as much walking involved. But I guess the factor is you guys, and what you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
But so any suggestions would be great. Sponsor.
Yeah, Fruition give us the pizza and support and beer.
Yeah.
Keep us running. So thanks Fruition, and they also do a good job. Getting your job. Yeah, John, who's not here, but he's also one of the co-organisers. He's dealt with them. Yeah. Have you dealt with them?
I've had it. I've been placed.
You have as well.
Yeah. So they're nice guys.
Yeah.
Nice guys. Talking of recruitment, I don't know if this is.
Hi.
So the next meetups in August, we've got the 12-factor app methodology coming up with Ian Cooper.
Yep.
I'm really looking forward to that one. It's apparently the talk he gave in Manchester a few months back really, really popular.
It's
There's a really,
in an arena or something, wasn't it?
I heard it was an arena, yeah. Yeah, it's like 12,000 and then after that, in September, we've got from monolith to microservice using Azure Functions and API Management Gateway.
So we've actually got a double act there because, Tom from Crisp.
Oh, is this a C#8?
Yeah, he's given a talk on C#8 features. So we're going to squeeze that in, so it's going to be
Double whammy.
double whammy, maybe
Awesome.
an hour break, something like that. So that's something to look forward to.
And the good news is there's no news section this week. I know. It's been a slow month.
Don't tell me you're taking the joke.
But anyone got any news? Go on.
Google Maps now charges.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So yeah, our site has a lot of maps on it, and we went from it being this lovely free thing to having some sums being £1,000 a month. So
Ooh.
I've been quickly rewriting all our maps to use Leaflet and OpenStreetMap.
Why have you done that?
You tried Azure Maps as well.
I haven't tried Azure Maps.
But Big Boy is quite good.
Or Big
It
Maps.
is for the same thing, but Azure
Yeah.
charge what's for it. I think it's probably
So yeah, so we're going OpenStreetMap. It seems to work pretty well so far.
So we have news. Anybody? Is there anyone else who has any development related news?
Yeah.
Is Chrome 68 development related news? HTTPS everywhere and warnings when you're not HTTPS?
not secure in big
Yeah,
bold
yeah.
letters.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Is that properly out? Is that like down?
Yeah.
I think it was yesterday, wasn't it?
It was Tuesday. that they launched it. So,
Which
Oh.
also lines up. I don't know if that's old news, but Core 2.1 supports what is it? HTTPS out of the box. Is it? Yeah.
HSTS.
Yeah.
it's got dev certs.
Yeah. A lot, I say.
So one of the things we were asked to plug another meetup. It's Leeds Code Up. I don't know. Have any of you heard of it? It's a new meetup. They had the last one. So the first one.
Some of the first one. First one at this location. But
Yeah.
the big one before that.
So it's a meetup basically targeted at learners, development learners. So anybody who is new to development or in the beginning stages of learning the trade, this meetup is for them. So that there are mentors who turn up, people who've been in the industry for a long time, and anybody who wants to learn more. This is the best place to learn. So if you know anybody who is on that initial rung, you're right. Yeah. If you know anybody who's on that initial rung and needs some help, or do you think would benefit from some help, that sounds like it's going to be a really good meetup for them. So yeah, and if you need any more information, Gareth's at the back there with his hand up.
Yeah, cool.
So I'll put a comment in the meeting.
Yeah.
There's something I wanted to mention anyway, because there's a couple of meetups I go to as well. Leeds Code Dojo. It's more of a practical thing. It's not .NET, so you can, it's any language you want, and it's really good. Slightly more intimidating than Leeds. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's good fun. And then there's an Leeds Umbraco meetup. That's recently started. There's also a Leeds Data Science meetup that's had their second meetup recently, where I gave a talk, which was my imposter syndrome flared up there massively. I gave a talk on product recommendations and Azure machine learning in front of a bunch of data scientists.
That's great.
I don't know why I used that. Anyway.
So really quickly, so Tech of the Month. Every month we mention something that we kind of advocate the use of. Well, this month we've got something called Event Flow. Now, has anybody used Event Flow? Has anybody heard of Event Flow? It's a .NET package. Lots of good. It's basically a CQRS with event sourcing NuGet package. does anybody know what event sourcing is? Yeah, there's some nodding of the heads. And CQRS?
We've had talks on it.
We've had
Come on,
talks-
guys.
yeah. Command, query, responsibility, segregation. Okay, and event sourcing is a different approach to handling data, where instead of it being kind of monolithic rows, you're handling events. Your data as events. Okay, so I recently had a project where the developer, who I inherited the project off, had decided to go down this event sourcing route and use this event flow package. And on the face of it, it's an amazing package. It does everything for you out of the box. The only problem is that
I feel like there's a butt coming.
yeah. The only problem is that so much of it is hidden in the actual mechanics of it. It's got its own DI, its own implementation of CQRS. That because so much of it is under the hood, you can't. You have no idea what any of it is doing.
Yeah.
So it's almost impossible to unit test. It's almost impossible to integrate, test it. So the reason I'm mentioning it is because you should probably avoid it. but you really should check it out, because it's a truly amazing piece of development that someone has taken the time to piece together these implementations, these aspects of development, and put them into a library. And there's so much in there, and the whole event sourcing idea is incredibly powerful. And we don't have the benefit of being able to strip it out and put something more traditional in. So we're actually using it. And just this last week, I've got to the top of the wave, and I'm just surfing down a wave of nuts and bolts at the moment. But check it out. I'll put a link to it. Event flow. Even just the documentation is worth a read, because it's a fascinating subject. The CQRS and event sourcing.
Is it fascinating?
It is, genuinely, yeah.
Why don't you do a talk on it?
I may do a talk on it, but it would be a talk based on, I'm going to talk for a quarter of an hour on this, but don't use it. So yeah, I'll put a link to it. It's worth a look. So.
Can you not leverage your own DLLs with it?
Sorry?
Can you not integrate your own DLLs with it?
Yeah, it's actually quite flexible in that you can plug in Entity Framework. So you can leverage Entity Framework in the read models. The problem is, so much of it, if you're not familiar with that pattern, that way of working, so much of it is hidden underneath that you're not entirely sure. It's not clear, and it's certainly not clear from the documentation what is triggering what. Yeah. Have a look at it, read the documentation. There's some very, very simple examples for getting it off the ground. So I'd recommend it, because it's.
You'd recommend it, or you'd recommend?
I'd recommend it as a learning exercise to,
Have you had some experience with it?
No, it's just interesting you saying that, because this talk that we're doing today is around V4 of the SDK, Bot Framework SDK.
Yeah.
And it sounds like some of the issues that you're seeing in terms of transparency,
Yeah.
and it being very opinionated in terms of how it does things.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't necessarily reveal that to you. Those are some of the issues
Yeah.
that we saw with V3 of Bot Framework.
I'll caveat what I've just said. The CQRS. Don't think that I'm not advocating for CQRS, because CQRS in itself is an amazing pattern. It's a brilliant pattern. So if you haven't looked at CQRS by itself, do check that out, because that's great. So, our speaker today, James
Yes.
Mann,
James Mann.
Microsoft MVP, working as a software consultant with Black Marble, interested in chatbots and cognitive services. We're really lucky, because it's been on Channel 9 numerous times. So 2016, 2017, I'm right in thinking.
Yeah.
And you only
All
have to,
horrible, but yeah.
you only have to check out his YouTube channel to know that this guy's knows what he's talking about. There's lots of videos up there on this subject.
So
Thank you so
let's give
much.
James a warm welcome.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. Jeez. Well, lower your expectations. That's all I'm going to say. So today, it's good to see. It's a good turnout today, isn't it? It's good in this hot weather, so it's good to see you all. Today, we're going to be looking at bot framework with cognitive services. Now, can I do a quick show of hands? Who has used bot framework before? We have a few people. Now, those of you who've used it, I'm guessing C# by your t-shirt. Was that the previous version 3? Probably.
It was a while ago.
Okay, yeah.
It was with Lewis. I can't think of what it was.
Lewis.
Lewis, yeah.
That was wrong. Yeah, with Lewis. I found it painful.
How was the experience? Well, painful.
When I found the bot framework bit, I found the Lewis stuff didn't do what I wanted.
Kind of
to.
unpredictable.
Yeah.
Okay, it's improved a bit, but yeah, that's a fair point. So we're going to look at Lewis today, and I can kind of go through some of the things that I've learned over a couple of years of using it, just to make it a bit more reliable. I mean, the bottom line is it's a machine learning model, basically. So, I mean, we're so used to having predictable, deterministic. You know, we provide something and we get this output, but machine learning models not that way, is it? Sorry, am I going too far?
Need to move for Joe.
Okay, so it's split into two parts. First of all, we're going to have a look at really the motivation behind chatbots. You know, what is a chatbot? Why you would want to use a chatbot? Then we'll look at the tooling that you can use to make it easy, and then we're kind of just learning about, you know, how to add bots and some ways to build up conversations. And then we'll have a look at something called middleware. Which, have we got any ASP.NET Core developers here? So you guys have probably heard of the pipeline, the ASP.NET Core pipeline. Well, that works in a very similar way to the ASP.NET Core pipeline. And then once we've kind of taken care of that, I'm not sure what the plan is in terms of food, because obviously you've all eaten, so you're going to have to sit through this for 2 hours. Right? What is the plan, sorry?
We'll just take a break.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
got a little break.
Perfect, yeah.
Drink something.
Cool. So the first bit is really just kind of getting you up to speed. We're not going to look at any intelligence in the first bit. It's going to be done. It's really about you kind of learning the tools. And then the second bit is adding intelligence to that. So that's where you know, you're really going to see the richness of it. So this is lead sharp. So I'm guessing you're all C# developers. Yeah. Have we got any JavaScript, Node.js developers in here? A couple of people. Yeah. Python. Java.
I'm not proud of it.
Not proud of it. Oh. So, for those three groups, everything that I showed today is going to be C#, right? But the principles that I'm talking about are all applicable to the other SDKs. One of the goals of the bot framework team is to kind of bring these 4 SDKs in line. They're being ran by different groups, engineering groups, but they've all got the same goals. They're all working together, working to the same principles. So really, it should just be the language syntax that's different, right? So my aim today is to kind of inspire you all to take all these ideas that you've got working in many various industries and go away and apply what you see today and create your chatbot. Sound good?
Yeah.
So everything that you see today, the slides and the demos, you can pull them down from that GitHub repo. I'm going to record the videos as well. I just haven't had time to do this because we're looking at a preview and it's all new stuff. It's all new stuff to me. So I've been kind of just trying to get this content done for today. Today we're going to be looking at the following tools, right? So if you want to take a picture of this, if you're interested, or I can come back to it at the end. We're going to be using the Bot Builder SDK. We're going to be using the Bot Framework Emulator, which is a tool we can use to test and develop our bots. We're going to be using the following services. We're going to be using Lewis. Okay. We're going to be using something called Q&A Maker. Has anyone heard of Q&A Maker? No, that's good. That's quite an interesting one because it's really kind of quick and easy to get started with. And then I'm going to do some stuff in Azure as well. Okay. Does that sound good? Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So before we kind of crack on, I just want to set the scene. make sure everyone understands what we're talking about when we say chatbot. So if you think of chatbot, you're probably thinking something like this, right? So this is SkyScanner. So the idea is, SkyScanner obviously provide flights and holidays. The idea is you can talk to SkyScanner through a conversational interface. And this, here we're asking to find a deal to a particular place. And there's a back and forth to the user, but it's quite synchronous. Although we're using an asynchronous messaging channel, really this conversation is quite short-lived, and that's kind of what most people think of when they think of chatbots. But I've got another example, which I'll show the video for, and then I'll kind of just summarize it. And this is another really good example of chatbots. Hopefully you guys at the back could see that, but basically that was a virtual assistant that had organised meetings between multiple participants. The reason I show you that is not to sell the service, although it is quite a cool service. It's really just to make you think, well actually that there is a chatbot, but you on the surface it doesn't really look like one. So if you can think, when we're talking about chatbots, we're not just talking about things, Facebook Messenger or Slack. We're talking about anything that lives inside a channel, right? A non-traditional user interface. That make sense? All right, so now we've talked about what a chatbot is. Let's talk about why, what the motivation behind it. So the number one reason is distribution. So at this point, I like to, if you've got your phone with you, take it out and have a look on the home screen and see how many icons you've got there, messaging applications or email or SMS or whatever. Typically it's 6 or 7. I think this is mine from last year, and you can see I'm not a particularly social person, but I've got WhatsApp, Messenger, Facebook, Outlook, Instagram, email and Twitter. So there's a huge opportunity there really to engage with people where they're using applications, right? You can get apps out there to people. They don't have to download another app to use. They can just use the apps they're using. So there's a huge ecosystem there. This is changing all the time. One of the benefits of using something like Bot Framework is you effectively, although you can connect to these channels at the moment, you're effectively future-proofing yourself when new messaging channels come on board, right? So there's a social channel, Discord or something that lets you create bots, and if Microsoft bring that into Bot Framework, all you need to do is turn it on. You don't need to make any changes to your code to facilitate that. And the other big one is, everyone's got virtual devices now. Alexa is like the number one device last Christmas, I think. My grandma's got one. People who are not technically savvy are using these things, so there's a huge opportunity again to get your app out there. And finally, you can apply any kind of use case to chatbots. What I would say is there's some examples here. Most of these are really good examples, but there is one that personally I don't think is a particularly good application of chatbots, and that's finding the right product, right? So when you're designing a chatbot, you need to think about how the user is going to engage with it. If you're looking for a product, unless you have a very specific idea of what you need, I don't think a chatbot really works because it's a very focused, it's a very focused thing. You basically say, I want this, and you kind of refine it down. It's not suited to kind of broad discovery of information. So again, just, most use cases are applicable, but, you do need to think, are users really going to get any benefit from this? Would I be better just creating a website or an app, right? All right, so did that make sense? Nothing too taxing, hopefully, so far. So now we're going to look at how we can create a bot using Bot Framework. So it's difficult to create bots if you want to distribute that bot across multiple channels. So for example, if you create a bot and you want it to run on Slack and Teams, you've got users on both, how do you do that? What about if you've got a bot on Facebook Messenger and you want to bring it to Twitter or some other social channel? Typically it means you basically have to write to their API, and if you want to port it to a different platform, you have to comply with their API. There's variation in the APIs. So Bot Framework aims to kind of solve that by, you define your single implementation there in the middle, and then these are just connectors, these are configuration, right? So you just say, okay, I want to connect it over Skype or Slack, and all you do is put in an OAuth token, say that you trust it, and away you go. Your existing bot is working. So how does it deliver this? Well, we've got the bot SDK and the bot connector, which kind of provides the infrastructure for running your bot. We've got the channels, which is the connectivity to these social media channels. And then we've got this thing here, which is basically a web service. It's a RESTful web service containing your business logic. This is the brains of your bot. This is what actually drives your application. Does that make sense? So there's 3 steps that you need to do to get up and running. First of all, you need to build your chatbot, and you've got 4 options. And it's pretty straightforward to do. You basically just need to add a reference to a NuGet package. You implement an Ibop, right? There's one method you need to define. And here we're just saying if the message received is a message, then we just echo out what the user said. That's really trivial, but that's kind of hello world, right? Then once we've defined our code, we can register it. So we've got 2 options here. People are using Azure, I'm guessing, yeah? So you can use the portal to do this, or you can use Azure CLI. I've just got a quick video of just registering it using the portal. So if you search for channel registration, you give it a name. You stick it in a resource group. A resource group is just a way to manage your resources in Azure. You pick a pricing tier. There's 2 pricing tiers. There's a free and a standard. For most cases, free is totally fine, and you get unlimited messages per month. Then you pick what you want to host it, and then you create it. So you get unlimited messages and 10,000 premium messages. And premium messages, I've got a slide at the end talking about pricing, so I'll jump into that afterwards. Does that make sense? Then you distribute it, and this is literally just a case of configuring which channels you need to expose this to. Sorry, I went a bit mad with the animation. I've got to have one slide with animations, right? This is quite restrained, by the way. So you expose it with Facebook Messenger or Skype, the same application, just literally just turn it on, and whatever you need. Right? All right, does that make sense? Really straightforward. There you go. So I've got a demo now, so this is where you actually get to see it in action.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
So when you say that the bots, the web service, you mean just a .NET application running on IIS?
Correct. Yeah. I'm going to show you ASP.NET Core, but you can create it with Java. You can create it with Node.js if you want to, and it's literally just a web service that can accept RESTful JSON messages.
So it's your function?
Yeah. Azure Functions totally would work. Yeah. In fact, the Azure Bot Service uses Azure Functions to provide the kind of editor experience in Azure. That makes sense? So I've got a quick demo. As I said, this is going to be C#, so I'm going to use .NET Core. So I'm just going to quickly create a new app with the CLI. So I'm going to say .NET new. I want to create a web API, right? Simple as that. And I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it Hello Lead Sharp. And then that's going to go off and create me my web API project. So the only thing I need to do in terms of plumbing and adding packages and things, I just need to add one package. So it's called Microsoft.bot.builder.integration.ASP.NET Core, and then crucially at the moment we're on a preview, so we're on 4.0.1 preview. Oops,
I think you missed a P.
I missed the version, thank you.
And the P. The P on preview.
Oh my god, so many mistakes. Thanks. Right, so that's done. It's added that package to that app. So I can use whatever code editor I want now. I'm just going to use Visual Studio just because it's convenient, but you're not tied to using Visual Studio. So I come into Visual Studio and there's a couple of things I need to set up really to get this up and running. So first of all, I'm going to create a new folder in here. I'm just going to call it bots. So this is where I'm going to stick my bots, right? Just organize it that way. And I'm going to just add a class and I'm going to call it Hello Leads Sharp Bot. And we just need to implement Ibop. Okay. So we've got one method we need to implement. I'm going to make this asynchronous. So this method, we get this turn context. So bot framework has the idea of a turn, right? Every time someone says something to the bot or interacts with the bot in some way, maybe uploads a file or has some interaction, this turn gets triggered. And this turn basically creates this turn context, and it's got all the information about what the user said, when they've said it, and so on. So we can use that to basically say, if turn context activity, which is the activity the user sent, if it's a of type message, so these are the different types of activity that we can deal with. So you can see we've got message, we've got when the user's typing, we've got when someone's entered the conversation. So there's a bunch of different messages that we can, types we can use. I'm just going to use message, and then I'm just going to echo out just a really simple message. So I'm going to say turn context, send activity, and I'm just going to say hello, you said, and then turn context dot text, activity dot text. Okay, so that is kind of, hello world in bot framework. So the only other thing I need to do, I just need to set up my startup class to register bot framework, right? So a couple of things I need to do. I need to inject hosting environment into my startup class. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to just store that, and then when I configure the services, I'm going to use. I'm sure you guys, if if you've been doing .NET Core before, ASP.NET Core before, you'll have seen this. I'm just going to create a new configuration builder. I'm going to say use set base path, which is equal to content root path, and then add JSON, right? And that basically all that's doing is saying use my app settings file as configuration. Okay, so that's created me a builder, so now I can grab the config from that. I can register that as a singleton. Makes it available downstream, and then I just need to register my bot, right? So I do that, services add bot. Oops. And then I'm going to add hello leads sharp bot. Oops. Just fix the IntelliSense on there. That's going to, I'm basically going to define a delegate to configure it. And just add a reference to that as well. And then the only thing I need to do to get the bot up and running is just say options credential provider, use this config that I've generated. So I'm at new configuration credential provider. Whoops, sorry. Okay, and then just pass in my config. So that's registered the bot. That's made it available to an extra. That's made it available to bot framework. So now I just need to say use bot framework. So I just do this at the bottom. I say use bot framework, right? So the reason for this bit here, this credential provider, is basically because if you think about what I'm doing, I'm pushing a chatbot into Azure, and that chatbot needs to prove that it is the implementation of the bot, right? So we do that using this configuration, and I just need to basically put a little bit of configuration into my app settings file, just to basically say that it's this ID, it's this password. I'll show you where you get those values from in a minute. Okay, so once I've done that, I can run it. So I'm just going to run it. Actually going to run it. Oops. Like that. Has anyone heard of ngrok? Yeah, so it's a reverse proxy basically. So I can host a web service on my machine, and clients from outside my network can basically tunnel in, right? So let's see what I've broken there. So I've got ngrok already registered. So what we've got is we've got registration in Azure pointing to an ngrok endpoint. That ngrok endpoint is basically pointing to my local machine. So I just need to tell ngrok to start. So I can say 2356. So I'm basically saying route all external traffic 2356 to this local port, right? Does that make sense? Because the registration's in Azure, and if I want to test my local bot, I need the registration to be able to connect into my local machine. So I'm going to use ngrok to do that. So I'm just going to run that, and that's going to set up an endpoint for me that's going to basically tunnel the traffic to my local machine, right? So you can see I've got an endpoint, James Mann ngrok IO will be routed to that endpoint, right? Okay, so that's in theory everything that I need to see this working. So I've already deployed this out, so hopefully it should come back. Okay, it works. Hey, so that's actually coming from my local machine, and to prove it, I'll just set a breakpoint so you can see. Or you know what? I'll make let me set a breakpoint, and you'll see. So there you go. You can see in the turn context, you can see the activity and what's been said and where it came from and so on. Let's continue that, and I can do something like, okay, that's not a very nice experience. So I want it to appear like the bot's typing as it's thinking of its response. So I can do that by saying activity, typing activity is turn context activity create reply. So we're creating a reply, which is a message we're going to send back. The typing activity type, typing activity type is activity types dot typing. So that makes sense. So I'm creating an activity that has a type of typing, and then I'm just going to send it back. Turn context, send activity, typing activity. And then if I just do a thread sleep, I know it's not great, but I just want to kind of get the point across. I'll leave you guys to optimize it, you know. So now we're running it again. So hopefully if I say hello again, we should see a typing activity come up in here. There we go. Which is a much more kind of realistic. It's just like a usability kind of niceness that it's always good to put in. So the crucial thing there is I've exposed that using this bot registration. Yep. So this is my channel registration you saw me set up in the slides. And inside here, this is pointing to my ngrok endpoint, which is this here. Yeah, James E. Mann ngrok.io. And we've got an app ID, which is the app ID that I put in that file, and the password associated with it as well. The channels, I've exposed it over. I've done this ahead of time because it takes 5 minutes to get all the keys and whatnot. But I've exposed it over Facebook, Teams, Slack. So I can jump over to Slack. In fact, it's already there. And I can say hello, and we should get the same thing coming back, hopefully. And it's running the same code. That's the crucial bit for you. Does that make sense? Any gaps in that? Because this is new stuff, by the way. So I appreciate it might be a bit rough, the presentation. So if there are any gaps, please let me know. Yeah?
How
Question?
is what you've coded from the previous versions, the stuff that's actually stable at the moment? Because when I was looking at it,
Yeah.
the event, what was it, the on turn?
Yeah.
There wasn't an on turn.
There isn't an on turn, no. It's coming back to this, you know, you've got this kind of obscure, the bot v3 is quite obscure, it adds a layer and it hides a lot of stuff that it's doing. You basically create an ASP.NET HTTP endpoint, and then you have to kind of create a dialogue or something and pass it to the dialogue to use it. With this, it's much more streamlined, so you can literally just create your bot and it takes care of everything for you. Anything additional, you basically choose to put it in. Yeah. Cool. All right. So I'm gonna crack on because I've got quite a few demos to get through, and that was probably the longest one because I wanted to show you the life cycle of it, but hopefully it gave you a good idea. So in terms of modeling a conversation, there's a few options we have. Now I've shown you the single turn one already, and these are, if you're talking to Alexa or if you're talking to Google Home, these are kind of the interactions that you can have with those devices where you ask a question, what's the weather like in Leeds, and it tells you, and then the conversation ends. Now if you want something a bit more complicated, then you're going to have to implement multiple turns. So Bot Builder isn't opinionated about how you do that. However, it provides this dialogue framework to allow you to do that and just make it easier. If you don't want to use either of those built-in features, you can completely write your own and just take advantage of the channel connectivity that it gives you. But this is a huge amount of work. This is pretty easy, so I'm going to really focus on this today. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so let's just recap adding bots. So if we want to add a bot, just create an instance of it. It needs to implement onTurn, and the onTurn is basically the method that gets run every time a user interacts with it. So all we need to do, implement a class which implements Ibop, right? That's exactly what you just saw. And then we just need to register it. Simple as that. Now, I added the configuration credential provider because I was using a real bot channel registration, but the other demos that I'm going to show you, I'm just going to use the emulator, so I don't actually need to provide that configuration, but just look for information. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So you've seen a bot. Now let's talk about what other options you have in the turn context lifecycle. So middleware, if we just kind of recap, if you've used ASP.NET Core before, you've seen this diagram a million times, I'm sure. So it's it's basically middleware is basically any cross-cutting functionality that isn't specific to an application, right? So it's not business logic, it's something more general. So things like storing conversation state, it's not particular to any given application, it's generic. Error handling, you don't want to have to write error handling every time you create a bot. Things like natural language recognition using Lewis or sentiment analysis, and you could use your imagination. Things like login and routing based on the request. You can do it all with middleware. So the pipeline contains one Ibop. You've got to have at least one instance of an Ibop implementation, and optionally zero or more instances of iMiddleware. The pattern's pretty simple, right? If I say next invokes the next component in the pipeline, does that make sense to people who are using ASP.NET Core? Basically, the idea is a pipeline stage can choose whether to invoke the next stage in the pipeline by calling next or not calling next. Like let's say you added some kind of authorization in there, you could, if the user doesn't provide the right secret password, you could not call next, at which point the next component in the pipeline wouldn't receive it. So this is a visual. So when the user sends a message, middleware 1 has the opportunity to do something before it's any of the other middleware's done anything, right? It then calls next. Middleware 2 then has the opportunity to do something before, and then it calls next, and then it's handed off to the bot, right? Once the bot's done, we kind of get an after event on this, and we can do some processing after the bot, and then again with middleware 1 before finally we return back to the user. Now, if this doesn't choose to call the bot or call the next item in middleware, the bot will basically never get the opportunity to interact with the user for that turn. That makes sense? Pretty clear? So how do we do this? We create a class which implements iMiddleware. It's similar to creating a class that implements iBot. We've got one method we need to implement. The difference here is we've got this delegate, this next delegate. So we can use the context in the same way as we can with the bot. But the difference is we call the delegate, right? And after we've done our before functionality, and then we get the after activity as well. We then register it in a similar way to how we register the bot. All right, does that make sense? So I'm going to show you this. I'm not going to code this by hand, so it should be good. Yeah, thanks. Cool. So what I've got. You guys at the back, you're going to have to tell me if it's too small, and we'll have to work out what we can do. Yeah, that is not a bad idea, actually. Yeah, turn around. Yeah, that's like you're thinking. So here, just to kind of recap what we talked about, we need a bot, right? So we've got a bot which really doesn't do anything. All we're doing is basically sending a message saying, this is where we are. We're in simple bot. We're in the on-turn method, right? Simple as that. Then we've got two pieces of middleware. We've got middleware 1, and this is the pass-through middleware. So we're just writing something out before, calling the next delegate, and then writing something out after, right? And then we've got middleware 2, and this is a bit more complicated because we've got some kind of business logic here. So what we're doing is we're running the before activity, and then we're saying if the text is equal to secret password, then we call next. Otherwise, we don't call next. And what that means is, calling next is totally optional. If we don't call next, then the next thing in the pipeline never receives the message. So it's a good way to kind of control who sees what. Okay. So the last thing that I want to show you is our registration. So the key difference is when we register our bot, we just say which piece of the middleware we want to attach to that bot. The order is important. If I had middleware 1 before 2, it means middleware 1 will run before middleware 2. So, if I just run this, this time I'm going to use the emulator.
So if one of them, if next isn't called,
Yeah.
how is that handled then? If you use it for authentication, for example.
So if next isn't called, the downstream component never gets the message. That's the crucial thing. It's almost like the message never happened.
But it's not
But
like
how's it-
blocking a
how's-
thread forever or something.
Say again, sorry.
It's not like blocking a thread indefinitely. Or
No,
something.
no, it's not blocking the thread indefinitely. No, it's the fabric's kind of taking care of that for you. Yeah, I see what you mean. So if I'm going to use the emulator now because it's a good opportunity to show you how that works. So the emulator is basically where you can test your bots locally without publishing them up to you to Azure and creating a tunnel and all that. It's a bit easier. So I've got a bunch of endpoints set up already. So if I just want to connect to this pass-through middleware, you'll see if I send a message, you'll see middleware 1's fired, middleware 2, so the before, middleware 2, the before. And then because we haven't called next, because I haven't provided my secret password, we're back in middleware 2 in the after, and back in middleware 1 in the after. Right? If I say secret password, you'll see that middleware 1 fires before, 2 before, then our bot gets called because we've called next. And then we've got after 2 and after 1. So it's pretty simple, right? You just need to be aware of it really. Does that make sense? Don't want to labour it too much because you guys are not idiots, so I think that's probably enough. So yeah, so there's a bunch of sort of out-of-the-box middleware components that you can use that basically do stuff before the message reaches your bot. One of them is Lewis, which we'll have a look at in a moment. Okay, so dialogues. So anyone who's used version 3 of Bot Framework has probably come across dialogues before. They solved a really interesting problem in maintaining a conversation that has multiple different parts and being able to sort of jump around in the conversation. But the development model was a bit clunky. So they've kind of looked at the development model and tried to streamline it, solving similar goals, but making it a bit easier. So let's just talk through an example of a banking bot. This banking bot, we can maybe get our balance, make a payment, that kind of thing. So let's just talk through the flow. So the first thing we do is we have this idea of a dialogue stack, right? So as we go through the conversation, we're in different parts of the conversation, different dialogues. So when we start the app, we're in the main dialogue, and the main dialogue is basically disambiguating. It's saying, would you like to make a payment or check the balance? You guys, you can't see this, can you, I'm guessing? This says make payment, check balance, right? The user then makes a choice, make payment, at which point we transition into the make payment dialogue. So we're in a different part of the conversation now. Now we're still in the make payment dialogue, and the bot's saying, okay, who do you want to pay? We're capturing information that's particular to that part of the conversation. We say account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How much should I pay? £100, right? Thank you, I've paid £100. At this point, this dialogue's complete. That part of the conversation's finished, so that dialogue comes off the stack. We're back in main dialogue, and we're basically in a loop, and the bot's basically saying, okay, thank you, I've done that. Anything else I can help with? Do you want to make a payment, or do you want to check balance? It's really rudimentary, but the principle is we kind of, as we say different things, we move into different parts of the dialogue stack. Right? So here we're checking balance, disambiguating further, saying current or savings. User said current, so we're adding a current balance dialogue on top, right? And so on. Right? I'm not going to labour it too much because hopefully you get the point. Yeah, good. So how do we implement this? Well, we need to define dialogues in something called the dialogue set. And there's 3 options we can use. So for the most simple of interactions, we can use prompts. So we can basically add a prompt. There's a bunch of different prompts that it gives you. You can prompt for numbers, you can prompt for dates, you can prompt for text. And it gives you some handling for, you know, if you say, add a date prompt, for example, the user can express a date in a number of different ways. It can say, you know, next Tuesday or Tuesday the 15th or 2 days from now or that kind of thing. This will kind of do the job of applying a bit of intelligence to that and provide a date time in a format that you can use in your app. So the idea is it provides some validation, it provides a little bit of intelligence. It's not using machine learning, but it's using some, you know, recognizes that, you know, do quite a lot of work for you. We can then use something called the waterfall step. So if we've got, let's say we've got a number prompt and we've got a date prompt and we want to prompt for a number first, and then once they've provided the number, we want to prompt for a date. Well, we can basically add them as waterfall steps. And basically that literally means, you know, capture this information from this prompt, and once you've captured it, flow through to the next step. And then finally, we can kind of compose dialogues of other dialogues. So you can compose them with prompts of waterfall steps. So you can build up really rich behaviors using a combination of these 3. Okay, so typically you use a mix of all 3. You use a prompts to get responses back. You'll use waterfall steps to kind of build up different parts of the conversation, and then you'll use composite dialogues to bring everything together. Does that make sense? I think it made more sense if you can see some code. So I've got a demo of what you've just seen. How are we doing for time? Are we okay?
Great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Almost ready for the break?
Break in a second, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll just do this demo and then we'll have a break out every time. So I've got another demo here. Like I say, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because the important thing for you guys is to understand the principle, and then if you're interested, being blunt, you can look at this in your own time. So I've got this dialogues example, and this basically just mirrors what I just showed you. So again, we've got our bot. Yeah, I don't know why I call this simple bot components, but that's our banking bot basically. And let's minimize that so you can see it. So what this is doing is basically building up our dialogue set, right? This is the root dialogue, and this is the thing that's bringing everything together. So here we're just adding our main dialogue. And then, oops. What we have to do in our bot is basically on the turn event, we basically say if it's a message, so if the user said something, we retrieve the conversation state, right? Because this is a conversation that we're dealing with. But you can use a strongly typed object, or you can use a dictionary to store that conversation state if you want to. I've used the dictionary because it's just a bit easier for me to illustrate what's going on. But you can, you don't have to use a dictionary. And then you create a dialogue context, right? So you create a dialogue context, pass in the turn context and the state. And the first thing you do is say continue. And the bot framework fabric will take care of basically using the state to rehydrate the instance of the dialogue. If the turn context hasn't responded, that basically means that the user hasn't responded to any of the prompts that in the dialogue the first time it runs. Then we just say begin the dialogue, right? Does that make sense? So if I now jump into main dialogue, so this is where you can see the waterfall steps. So I got some emojis in there for fun. So here we basically, this dialogue, right, implements, derives from dialogue container, which is that way of building up composite dialogues. And here I'm just adding to my set of dialogues these waterfall steps. So here I'm saying, I'm banking boss, would you like to check balance or make payment, right? It's very, very robotic. And then we provide two options, and we use this choice prompt to basically visualize an option for the user. Once they've provided that information, and they might not provide it straight away, they might say, I don't understand, what do you mean, or something, but that prompt will take care of making sure they do eventually provide it. We'll then flow into the next part of the waterfall, which is to get what basically the option the user said. So if they've said check balance, then we begin the check balance dialogue. If they've said make payment, then we begin the make payment dialogue. After that's done, we call replace, and all that does is replaces the current dialogue, which is finished, with a new instance of itself. So that might seem a bit odd, but all that does is basically replaces itself with itself to go in a loop. Okay, and then this is kind of the crucial bit that makes it work. So at the top we're defining our waterfall steps, and here we're basically adding them by ID, right? That's an ID. And then that's an ID, check balance dialogue, that's an ID. So we need to make this dialogue container aware of them, so we need to add those dialogues to this composite dialogue, right? So we've added its direct descendants and any prompts that we're using. Does that make sense? As I'm talking through it, it's kind of like, that's a bit weird, but actually it makes sense once you use it, right?
So does the framework take care of matching up what they put into the response?
Yeah.
If it's not an identical match?
So what happens is, let's say you've said number prompts, and the user's typed a date or something. The validation will kick in, and it'll basically repeat until it captures the right information. You can provide your own validation. You can provide your own message to say, you need to say this. So you can build up richness inside there. And once it's actually captured something that it considers valid, it will go on to the next step. And the key for this is building the dialogues in such a way that you've got loads of little bits of conversation. So you're not just in one big waterfall, because once you're in there, you're in there. You need to be able to make sure that people can jump around if they need to. Okay, so that's that. I'm just going to set a couple of breakpoints as I debug through this. So I'll set one at the first waterfall step, set one at the second, and the third, right? And I'll jump into the make payment dialog, because that's probably the more interesting one. So in this one, we're prompting the user to basically say, who would you like to pay? And then once they've provided that information, we store that in state, right? So we're retrieving the state from conversation state. Okay, middleware takes care of that. Then we store it using the value that's been provided. Then we prompt for a number. How much should I pay? And there actually there's a retry prompt string if they've got a number in. Okay, and once they've provided that, we go into the next step of the waterfall, which is basically confirming and then ending the dialogue, which takes us back to the parent, and the parent just goes in a loop, right? So the one thing that I didn't really explain as I was talking through that is we're using this conversation state. Where does that come from? Well, we need to basically add a conversation state middleware to our bot to make it aware. So here I'm just adding a dictionary. You could add whatever strongly typed class you wanted it to represent your conversation. Okay, and once you've added that, that becomes available in that turn context. Does that make sense? Yeah, mostly? Cool. I'm going to run this now. And then, again, I'm going to use the emulator to just test this. So if I say hello, we're in the debugger because the first dialogue has started, right? I'll just hide some of these because it's quite hard for you to see what's going on. And now we're just displaying this choice prompt, right? So continue. and we get these buttons. So it's generated the buttons for us. It makes it a bit easier. So I can say make payment. We're now into the next step. So I can retrieve that value. So you can see I've said make payment. I'm going to continue on. We're now in the make payment dialog. So remember that diagram where we kind of add in things to the stack? That's what we've done now. We've transitioned into the new dialog. Continue. Where we do like to pay. Account 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to prompt the user for a number. How much should I pay? So I'll just put 10. We're going to end that dialog, and then we come back to the parent dialog, which is going to replace itself, and then it's just going to go in a loop. Okay, so we're back at the start now, and it's prompting it's basically introducing itself and making the user aware of its capabilities. Okay, does that make sense? I mean, that is the most boring demo that you could ever imagine. So,
is the payment that was just done still maintained in state?
sorry.
The payment that was just done, with the account detail potentially still being in state?
So they would be, yeah, good question. They'd be in state for the lifetime of the conversation. So a conversation, you know, if you have a conversation with a Facebook Messenger, you get a conversation ID associated with it. And you don't get a new ID until you basically delete that conversation and create a new one, for example. So that's, you would have to be aware of that. Yeah.
So can you pass data between dialogues then?
Yes.
State data is accessible.
Yeah, you
Absolutely.
absolutely
Levels
can.
up.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
up or down.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's take a break because I think that was a bit heavy going, wasn't it? That one. It's downhill from here. So. It's up to these guys.
More drinks downstairs in the mess.
Yeah.
Can I get you drinks?
Sorry. All right, so we're into the second bit, which is hopefully going to be a bit more new stuff, more interesting for you guys. So the first thing we're going to look at is something called Q&A Maker. I think I already asked, but has anyone heard of this before? I got one person. That's
You
good.
mentioned it in the first half.
Hey. That's good. So Q&A Maker is basically a service which you can use to basically create a knowledge base. So if your company's got like an FAQ, maybe it's on a web page, maybe you've got an Excel document with these FAQs in, you can basically upload it to this Q&A Maker, and it will basically train a knowledge base and a conversational interface to it. So I'm just, rather than me explaining, I'm just going to show you because it's quite interesting. So what you need to do is, and again, you go to qandmaker.ai, and when you come here, you've got the option to create a new knowledge base. Okay, so I'm just going to, so it's actually worth mentioning that before you actually create your first knowledge base, you need to create the Q&A service in Azure, and that's so that if you decide to scale it up, Microsoft can bill you, basically make some money. I use a free tier, which allows you to have 3 knowledge bases for free, which does me fine. So if I just have a look in here, we've got a Q&A Maker service defined. And that just gives you basically an API key that you can use, and some links that you can use to make calls. Okay, so once you've done that, you can come into Q&A Maker AI and then select that subscription effectively. I'm just going to pick that now. So that's basically just the thing it's going to use for billing if I ever scale it out. Then I can give it a name. So this knowledge base, I actually want to take an FAQ that's available online. So I've just done a quick search and I found this University of Leeds one, which has got, I mean, it's semi-structured, isn't it? You've got these collapsible areas where you can sort of see the questions and answers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that URL. I'm going to feed it into this Q&A maker. So I'm just going to call it Minerva test. And then I can pass in a URL. So because it's a web page, I'll just paste it in there. But I can also add a Word document or an Excel document or PDF or whatever content my knowledge base is in. And then I just click create your knowledge base. And what's going to happen is it's basically going to look at that page and it's going to extract the questions and the answers and basically build a natural language model for you, so you can basically ask it questions.
So could you point that at Zendesk, for example?
Yes, good question. So obviously I'm doing this through the portal and I'm using a static URL, but everything that I'm doing here, there's an API that you can do the same thing with. So what you'd have to do is create that link between Zendesk and Q&A maker using the API, but you definitely could.
So it doesn't just go up and
it doesn't
scrape
scrape it all the time. You have to basically go in and add it. Okay, so you can see it's gone through that page and it's done actually a pretty good job. It's pulled some of the questions and the answers. We've got a bunch of things there. So once I'm happy with that, I can save it and train it, and that's going to build the machine learning model that we can use to interact with it. So I can say something like, we've got a question there which is how do I log on to Minerva? So maybe a user's not going to say exactly that. They're not going to say how do I log on. They might say how do I access Minerva? And it's basically going to do a best guess based on its intelligence. And actually it's worked. I wasn't expecting it to work, so I need to find one where it's not going to work. So if I type I can access Minerva, Minerva's not working. Something radically different. So now it's picked how do I access Minerva, which is obviously wrong. So you can click on this inspect and you can basically say actually that's not the appropriate answer, but I don't know which one was actually. Let's go with that. Yeah, and we can say that actually that's the right answer, and then we can retrain it. Or we can add other answers if we don't have an answer for that. And then the next time I ask that question or a similar question, phrased similarly, it's going to give me the right answer. So once that's done, so I can say Minerva not working, and then it'll give me a different answer. In fact, it's already given me it. So once that's done, once I'm happy with it, I've trained it, I can then go off and publish it. So just let me close that, get rid of that. So publishing basically creates me a RESTful endpoint. So I can just click publish. I think I might have used all my, I've used all my free resources. So you can create 3 basically, and I've published 3. So I'll show you one I've already published.
You get free stuff as an MVP?
I do, I do. I had, I don't really want to tell you about how much Azure credit I've used in the past year. Scary amounts. Scary, thousands of, it's crazy. So I had to calm down on my spending, use some free services. So this is the one I created yesterday, I think. So this has already been published. So if I go into settings, I should be able to see. This is basically, sorry, you guys probably can't see that, but we've basically got an HTTP endpoint there. Q&A maker is your website's /Q&A maker. We just do HTTP post with this JSON payload, the question, and then whatever our question is. So how do I access Minerva, whatever. And then we provide endpoint key and our model ID, basically. So that's, you can use that in any application. You don't obviously need to create a bot. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of summarize that. So what we do, we have FAQ content. So you guys have got, if you're working with FAQs, you've probably got stuff in text files or websites or PDFs or documents. We take that, push it into Q&A Maker, either using the portal or using its API, in the case of Zendesk. Q&A Maker will extract the question and answer pairs. It'll do a first guess at the index and the ranking. You can then train it. Then you can publish it out, and you get a RESTful endpoint which you can then consume with whatever application you want. In this instance, we're consuming it with a bot, but you could equally have another website consuming it, or you could have an app or whatever. So
do you know of any of the popular, you get the online chat like Snap Engage and Tidio chat that you can add. Do you know of any that have integrated Q&A Maker?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. And I do know it's being used, and because people really engage with this, I'm not sure whether any of the online ones are using it. I mean, Zendesk is perfect for this, isn't it? The knowledge base.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's sort of like a supplement to just online chat. Someone have, just have a couple of answers, coming out of Q&A Maker, and then they could sort of take over if it gets a bit more complicated.
It's interesting you said that, because Bot Framework has got this idea of, what do they call it? I can't remember the name, but the idea is basically you have Q&A Maker as like your first point of contact. So it tries to resolve in Q&A Maker. If it can't resolve in Q&A Maker, it's called dispatcher. If you can't resolve it in Q&A Maker, it will dispatch it to Lewis. If it can't resolve it using Lewis, it'll resolve it to a human. So it kind of does that for you, and they've kind of learnt that lesson. So it's quite astute that you've picked up on that. That's part of the V4 SDK. So what I'm going to do now is take the endpoint that I just created, or the one I created the day before, and create a bot. Well, I've already created one really. I'm just going to show you it. So if I just close some of these windows. So if I jump into demo 5, so the way this works, the way Q&A Maker works, is it uses the middleware. So this is a good example of an out-of-the-box middleware that Microsoft have created that you can use. So our bot itself is very simple. All the bot is doing is saying, if the term context isn't marked as responded, so basically if the Q&A Maker hasn't provided an answer, then we're just going to say, sorry, I don't know how to answer it, right? And then we hook up the Q&A Maker in our startup class when we set up our middleware, right? So here we're just adding the Q&A Maker middleware. There's a NuGet package for this. If you pull down the code, you can see the NuGet package. We pass in an endpoint which has the ID, the host, which you saw previously, and then the key. Okay, so I'll just show you the NuGet package as well. So it's basically this one, Microsoft.bot builder.ai.qa. Okay, so that's all you need. If I run that now, I can basically interact with Q&A Maker through my bot. I'll show you through the emulator, but you can imagine you can publish this to Slack or Facebook or whatever you want. And I can say something like, how do I log in? Hopefully that works. So yeah, it's basically going back to Q&A Maker using the API, using the training that we've provided. Over time, as people see random things, you can kind of implement that feedback loop and improve it. So it's really quick and easy to set that up. If I ask it something random, like, I don't know, what time is it in Leeds? Hopefully it will answer it. There we go. So it's saying, sorry, I don't know how to answer it.
Is that the point where you would dispatch?
Yes, exactly. So the dispatcher does it for you. You basically, when you register in your middleware, you say, these are all the things that I want you to handle. And then it will basically take care of sending it to Q&A to Lewis if it needs to, and then sending it to the bot where you can handle it. Okay, so that was quick, but you know, you can see it's really easy to get that up and running. Any questions on that? Sorry, I know I'm kind of racing.
So with Q&A Maker, you obviously need really structured content. Does it have to be, a stupid question, does it literally have to be question, answer pairs? Or can it be, so like we have a massive developer wiki that I've kind of put together where I work, and almost every day somebody asks a question, like it's on the wiki, here's the direct URL to the bit that you
Right, so you want it to
could I
work out what the question is?
Yeah.
Unfortunately not, it's not quite that sophisticated.
But if
You'd
I
have to do some
reformatted-
classification before.
Okay, but if I reformatted so that there were questions,
Yes,
I could just fire it that and then have a chatbot that everyone uses that's instead of bugging me.
yes, perfect. Yeah, that is absolutely perfect. Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to look at Lewis. So Q&A Maker was natural language processing, but it's kind of a pre-canned service that kind of does it for you. It's just matching questions with answers. Lewis kind of takes it a bit further, so you can define your own models. So before we go into the demo, I just want to kind of get some terminology across to you. So if we think of a plain English, or whatever language we're speaking, a plain sentence is known as an utterance, right? So this is an utterance: set the temperature in the kitchen to 21 degrees. That's something a user might say, something a user might type. It's plain English, it's not structured. Intent is what is the user trying to get out of this utterance. Here they're trying to set the temperature, okay? The entity is what objects they're referring to. So here there's two objects: kitchen, which is a room, and then 21 degrees, which is obviously temperature. So how does Lewis work? Well, we pass it an utterance. It goes into the API, it's just a RESTful API. We get the intent back in a JSON object, and we also get the entities back in a JSON object. Lewis gives us two components: a portal, which we use to define our model, and train, right? Because there's always it's a machine learning model. There's always going to be ambiguity. Sometimes it's going to get things wrong. So the portal is the way you can manage that and improve the quality of the model. And then we've got the API, which is a thing your applications will consume. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm just going to jump over to Lewis now and create a really simple model for home automation. So maybe set temperature and turn the lights on or something like that. So if I come over to my apps, so this is Lewis. The first time you log in, you'll see a blank canvas really, and you get the opportunity to create a new app. So I'm just going to create this, and I'm going to call it Leads Sharp Home Automation. I can pick a culture, so these are the languages that it will work with at the moment. This is growing all the time. So if you are interested in a language that's not in there, you can feed that back to the product team, and they'll kind of put it on the list of things to look at. So the first thing I want to do actually is define my entities. So these are the things that I'm interested in capturing from the user. So if we think about the home automation model, we've got a room, which is basically a list of rooms in a house, right, with maybe synonyms, and then a temperature, which could be anything. It could be 21 degrees C, it could be 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 Fahrenheit. However the user wants to say that, we need to create the right type of entities to make sure we capture it accurately and improve the quality of the model. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new entity. So I'll just talk you through a couple of these. I'm not going to talk about all of them because some of them are a bit more advanced and you're probably not interested at this point. So a simple entity is really when you can define what the user's going to say. So it could be anything. but it's used in certain contexts, right? So you basically, what he's saying is the machine learning model is going to work out and identify instances of this simple entity, which is really powerful, but it's also quite unpredictable. I'm guessing you were using simple entities.
I can't remember now, but this is
Yeah.
where I got stuck.
Yeah, so it's really powerful, but if you want something where you can guarantee it's going to recognize it, it's not the best thing to use. So what I would say is if you've got something like a room, which is like a list, so you know you've got a kitchen, a bedroom, blah, 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 those rooms might have synonyms, so you can define the synonyms, but basically it's a fixed list. And by defining it as a fixed list, you can really improve the quality of the model. So I'm just going to call this room. I'm going to say it's a list. And now I can basically type in the different rooms. So I could say kitchen. Does anyone have a different word for a kitchen? I was trying to think of.
Food room.
Food room. What? Galley.
Galley's better.
Galley, yeah. Yeah, that's it. Better example might be bathroom. You know, if you go to America, obviously they say bathroom. If you ask someone where the toilet is in America, you get some funny looks. So we wanted to be able to handle that. Shower room. So obviously, you know, over time you can, once you see what users are saying, you can improve this and add more synonyms and improve the quality basically, because what you're trying to do is get from something that's quite woolly and fuzzy to something that's quite well defined. So you basically, because your code is going to be working with this value, you don't really care what this is, because as long as it matches to that, right? So I'm going to leave it at that, you know, really simple. And then I'm going to come back into my entities, and now I'm going to add temperature. Now the temperature is obviously a universal thing, so rather than me having to train it as to what temperature looks like, I can use intelligence that's already been trained. So I can say add a pre-built domain entity. Sorry, wrong one. Manage pre-built entities, and I can add temperature. So all I need to do to add that to my model is literally just select it. And there was a bunch of other pre-built ones that you can use for different data types. So you can see we got number, ordinal, dimension, money, age, percentage, email, phone number, date time is a good one. It's related to that timex thing that I was talking to you about.
Can you add two temperatures to the same thing?
To the same phrase?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like this. Okay.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you definitely can. So we did a bot for, I mean, it's ridiculous, but we did a bot for ordering butties on a Friday. So one of the things is you can order multiple items, and you can say, you know, I want tomato sauce on this and brown sauce on this. So as long as you train it.
Yeah, I think I was trying to say between this date and that date.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So in that instance, you could use a, I guess composite would be a good one. And so let me just.
Date range becomes the thing.
Yeah. So then you add child entities. So I have to go and add date time to it. But this is one of the more advanced ones. But since you've asked, it's actually a really good example. So date range, and then you can, that composite can have children, and it can have as many children as you want, and then you can train it. When you train it, you basically say that the composite has these values in it, and you can include as many as you need. Yeah, a lot of this is using the right entity type, and it's a lot of trial and error, to be honest, because you're not going to start with the most complex thing, are you? Because it's not intuitive. You're going to start with a simple thing, and the simple thing doesn't necessarily give you the best results. Okay, so we've got our entities defined. Now I'm going to create an intent. So it's home automation. I want to set the temperature. Okay, so now I need to provide 5 examples to set the temperature. So I'll start. Turn, no, that's a bad example. Set kitchen to 10C, right? It's very cool. So you can see it's identified because we've used those like concrete types. It's already identified that's a room because it matches, right? So that's very, very concrete, and it's also recognised the temperature is 10C. Does anyone else want to give me an example of how you might set a temperature? Because I'm very sort of one-dimensional.
Turn up by a degree.
Say again?
Turn up the temperature.
Turn up temperature. In kitchen, I get. Oh, let's do toilet. So it should hopefully recognise toilet. I didn't actually say what temperature to turn it up, but that's fine. Any others?
Make it warmer.
Make it warmer. Food room, thank you. I was trying to think what that obscure one was, and it's picked it up, obviously. So the idea is you train this on as many variants as you can, which is why I was asking different people, because if I just train it on how I speak, the first person who tests this is going to break, because no two people talk the same, do they? So the idea is you train it, so I can say, I don't know, kitchen, 21 degrees, very, very concise there. I don't know, God, it's really hard doing this under pressure. Anyone got another example?
Thermostat?
Thermostat.
Set the thermostat.
Set the thermostat.
I don't know, maybe something Fahrenheit.
Yeah. That's a very obscure phrase, isn't it? To 70 Fahrenheit.
I'm sure if we were at sea, it would be great.
Can it handle Kelvin?
Sure, okay. Set Kelvin to 0. I'm guessing they're not, to be honest. No, it's that's one step too far, I think. So I'm just going to delete that. I don't want to break it, you see. So once I've defined, I think I need a minimum of 5 to train it, which I should have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can train it now. And that builds us the model. Once the model's trained, I can test it or I can publish it. And at the point of publishing it, I get an API which I can consume in the same way as I can with Q&A Maker. So let me just test it. So does anyone want to give me a suggestion that we haven't said so far to test this out?
Cold toilet, please.
Cold toilet, please. So it's 93% certain that it's set temperature. And if I click inspect on here, hopefully you can see it's identified that the room is toilet. And I'm not sure if it shows you the normalized value in here either. No, it doesn't show you, which is annoying. But in the JSON, you basically get what it calls a resolution. So when it matches a synonym to a definition, you get a resolution. So it'd say bathroom or whatever we called it. So, okay, I don't want to spend too long on that, but does that give you a flavour? So I'll just point you back to this one, which is basically the same thing, but I'll just train it a little bit more. So we've got adjust lights and adjust temperature. So you can see I've already trained this. It's a bit more sophisticated because I can say turn on or off the lights, lights, blah blah blah, and temperature is the same as the one that we looked at. So now I've got that defined, I can go ahead and publish. So this, it takes a minute to load, but once it's loaded, if I just tick the Europe regions endpoint, it'll give me a URL which I can basically run my query against. And all I need to do is provide, there's a parameter on the end which is Q, it's like a search query. And you just put your utterance in there and it'll give you a JSON object back. So if I just click on this and then I say something like set the kitchen to 21 degrees C. Okay, so you'll see, oops, so it's kind of hard to see that, but we've got a top scoring of intent of adjust temperature, which is 94%. Probable, And then it also lists other things that it might be. So it might be, there's a very small percentage that it might be just lights. An even smaller percentage that it might be something else. And it's also listed the entities that it's extracted. So you can see here, the kitchen is a type of room. The resolution, which is the thing I talked about, if I said toilet, it should resolve back to bathroom. In this case, kitchen resolves to kitchen, so it gives you the same value. And then the temperature gives you, again, it gives you the thing that you said, 21C, and then it gives you a resolution which has the unit, which is C or F, maybe K, although that doesn't seem to work, and then the value, right? So you can treat it as a strongly typed object and process it. Maybe you've got a hive system and you want to change the temperature based on what the user's saying. Well, you can wire this in really easy now. So that kind of leads me on to a more intelligent bot, which is basically taking our Lewis model and wiring it into a chatbot so we can talk to it. So how does this work? Well, a user comes along and they interact with it over some kind of channel. It might be Facebook, it might be Twitter, whatever it is. I'm going to show you over the emulator, but you saw how easy it was to publish to other channels. That goes to our API controller, right? Which is the endpoint that bot framework sets up for us. We don't need to worry about this, but this is what happens. We then have this Lewis middleware, right? And Lewis middleware binds to our Lewis AI model. Okay, so it passes in an utterance and it gets back that strongly typed JSON. And then we have our bot which can do something with it. Okay? That makes sense? So if I jump across now to this demo. So the key takeaway from this is you can use machine learning to do all kinds of natural language processing and make it convenient for the user, but ultimately somewhere you're going to have to do something in code. You're going to have to write a switch statement, you're going to write an if or whatever. There's just no getting around it. So here we've got first of all I'll show you the startup. And again we're just registering our bot. Here we're adding a Lewis recognizer middleware, which is again another NuGet package that we can just plug into. Bot Builder AI Lewis. And again, in the same way, we just pass in an ID, a key, and the endpoint that we want to call to. Okay, that's all we need to do. And what happens is, when someone says something to the bot, if you think back to that middleware pipeline, the first piece of middleware is the Lewis middleware. It looks at the utterance. It basically extracts the intent, the entities, and it puts that on the context, the turn context, so the bot can make use of it. So if I just jump into the bot, you'll see that we are basically looking in the turn context. We're basically getting the recognizer result from the Lewis recognizer middleware. That's how we access the Lewis response. And then we just pull out the Lewis result. And this is really simple. Like I say, it's just a switch basically saying if the top scoring intent is null, then there's been an error basically talking to Lewis. If it's none, then Lewis hasn't worked out what you mean, right? If it's just lights, then we do whatever we need to adjust the lights. So here we're basically retrieving the room from the list of entities, and we're listing whether I've said on or off, right? And then I've just put some, like, this is just information really. You know, in a real application, what you're doing at this point is you'd maybe have a dialogue which would go and disambiguate the room and say, okay, I'm turning the lights off, which room would you like to turn them off in? But for now, I'm just, saying, okay, this is where I do that. But finally, if we have a room and whether it's on or off, we just send a message saying setting the lights to on or off in the whatever room. Okay, and then similar with temperature. we're retrieving the room from the list of entities, the temperature from the list of entities, and then we're pulling the temperature value and the temperature unit from the resolution inside the temperature. Remember, in the JSON you've got a unit and a resolution, unit and a value, I think. Yeah. So if we've got all three of those, then, sorry, if we've got all three of those, we just echo that out. So if I just run that, does that make sense? It's simple, obviously, but hopefully it gets the idea across. Okay, so if I just jump into this bot, does it? Anyone want to give me an example? Turn the lights off or set the temperature. Come on.
It's dark in here, and I'd like it to be lighter.
I can almost guarantee that's not going to work, but we'll try it. Oh, okay. It's right. So this is where it becomes important to test it, because people are going to mess with it as soon as they get it, like you've just done. You know, be nice. But yeah, I can say something like, I don't know, set kitchen to 21 degrees C. Right. I think I can do something like, I don't know, set toilet to 21 degrees Celsius or whatever. And it should resolve to the same unit, yeah, to the same unit. So it does that for you, and you can treat it consistently. So there you go, that is Lewis.
Does the emulator come with a SDK? Or?
The emulator is just a download. You literally just install it and connect to your... What I haven't been showing you, sorry, I've kind of not been showing you the emulator very much, but there's loads of features in here, and you can basically add an endpoint, and all you do in here is just adding a reference to the ASP.NET Core application that you're running. So in this instance, if I just come into here, you'll see 44334, which is, don't know if it's still running. Yeah, so Lewis middleware, you can see is running on HTTPS 44334. So that's kind of doing everything for you. Does that answer your question, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, it runs on Electron. It's died. Okay.
It's a great moment.
Yeah, the TV.
Technology, yeah.
Yeah, it's based on Electron, so it's cross-platform. So if you're doing this on Linux or a Mac or whatever, everything I'm showing you today you can do on those platforms. Someone more qualified than me to do this.
I think it was just takes a while. That one's working. Turn around. Street to working.
Just continue on your phone from here.
Oh, Jesus. Hey.
Got a sharp.
Is there like option to add synonyms automatically for those?
There is, really good question. So,
I saw this too, to
yeah.
add synonyms, but it was a bit manual.
yeah. So, so if I let's say I go into, I don't know, room, yeah. You can see it's basically kind of recommended all these different variations for me, so I can basically I can add the ones I want. And the other thing is, if you've got a file, like a text file with all this information already in, so you could get someone else to do the classification and just pull it in here, and it's already pre-trained. One thing that I haven't shown you is, if I go to my apps, I can export this as, there's two things. I can export it as an app. If I export it as an app, it gives me basically a big JSON file with everything that I've defined and all the things I've trained it with. So it's quite a good way to distribute it and put it in source control and so on. But the other thing is, you can also download a log of what people are saying to it. So your application doesn't necessarily need to track that. Lewis will track it for you, and you can basically use this file to provide that feedback loop. Okay, interesting. I don't know if you guys saw that before it came up, but there was basically a list of stuff in there. I mean, yep. Let's close that. Let's just. Well, there you go. You can see all the random things I've put in as I've been training it, and you can see whether it's matched it or not, and whether, what Lewis thought it was, and whether Lewis was wrong or not, and so on. So, cool. Let me continue on. Oh, one other thing I just want to say as well. If you do look at the source code for this, I've put the model that I used inside the GitHub repo, so you can import this and try it out with your own subscription. Okay. Okay, we've just got 2 more demos and then I'm done, promise. So up until this point we've talked about conversations being text pretty much. So I just wanted to mention this briefly because you can make bots more engaging using cards, right? So if you think you're sat in an airport and you've got a message saying your flight's delayed and the departure's now at 3:45, imagine how much better you would feel if you got this nice visual card, right? It'd make it all fine. But yeah, it's a bad example, but hopefully you can see the visual impact of that is more, it just looks better, doesn't it? It looks, you look at that and you think, oh, look at that and you think, it's not so bad. So there's loads of different cards you can use. Here are some examples. You've seen the airline. These are some Slack examples where you can, have buttons which you can interact with. You can display graphs. You can show lists of information with images and maps and so on. There's loads of options. We can basically make use of these quite easily. Bot Builder gives us the capability to use strongly typed objects to do this. 3 steps. We create our activity. So we've done this like 10 times now. So hopefully that looks familiar. We then create a card. So we've got different types of cards for videos, for images, for hero cards, for receipts, for airline tickets, and so on. And then we just add the card to the attachment of that activity. So does that make sense before I jump into the code? So, and again, this is one that I'm going to do quickly because once you've seen one, you've seen them all. So I'll just show you what it looks like basically and show you a few demos, and then you can have a look and refer to it in your own time if you're interested. So we have a bot. And inside that bot, we've got literally a big switch saying if the user said adaptive card, then send out an adaptive card. If they said animation, send out an animation, and so on. And all these are doing is really, let me have a look at the video card, which is quite a good one. So a video card, that's going to show a big book bunny, which sounds more dubious than it is. And what was the other one? So the other one I wanted to show you was the adaptive card. Has anyone heard of adaptive cards? So adaptive cards they're basically a movement that Microsoft are trying to get people to adopt to standardize representing cards as JSON basically. So it's like almost like a micro format. So you can basically go to this adaptive card builder and build up a card that has 3 columns and an image here and text here and so on. So to show how that works, I've just created a JSON file. I've used that wizard just to create a really simple kind of adaptive card. So here we've got a container which has a number of items with text blocks inside it and columns and another container and so on. If you are interested, adaptivecards.io is the place to kind of look up more information about that. So what I'm going to do is just again run another demo. Oops. So I can say, if I say hello, it's going to tell me what the cards available to see are. So I can say something like receipt card, for example. And it shows me receipt. And this is presented in the most appropriate way for the channel. So Facebook Messenger, for example, has got a really good way to graphically represent this. If the channel doesn't support the card, well, then it'll down render to an image. So you can kind of maintain a consistent set of behavior. So if I say video card, we'll get a video card which has some text. It has a link and it has an embedded video in it. The Big Buck Bunny. I can say adaptive card. Oops. And this is a richer kind of customized card where we've defined our own content and our layout, and it looks pretty good. So all we're doing here, in all instances, we are literally just creating an attachment and then adding that attachment to in this create response function our activity, right? Creating a reply and then adding the attachment to it. Does that make sense? Yep, cool. Right, so I'm not going to labour that, I'm just going to move on to the next one. So the very last demo that I've got is something called proactive messaging. So if you think of all the examples we've looked at, it's been quite, the bot says something, the user says something, the bot responds, the user says something else, the bot responds. It's very sort of question and answer type. But sometimes,
Quick question.
yeah,
How long did your video go on for?
it's almost done, like 5 minutes. Jeez.
It's picked up out of you.
Yeah, all the audio is still going over.
Say again?
All the audio from it's still going out.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Do you want me to, I mean,
It's
I,
stopped now. It's fine.
No, you mean the Big Buck Bunny?
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, it's publicly available, it's not.
No, it's still
Oh, you're going to get a copyright strike, is that what you're worried about?
No, you're just
No,
going to
just
hear it
the
over
audio
you
that
talking.
nobody
Oh,
can
okay,
stop.
sorry. You want me to turn it off? Let me turn it off, sorry. I didn't realise it was still going. It goes on for a long time. It goes on for 10 minutes. Yeah, it's a good job. Sorry, I didn't understand what you meant. Has it stopped?
Seems to have now.
Right, so up until this point it's been request response type interaction, but quite often that's not it's not what you need really. So a few examples, reminders and alerts. The flight one was a really good one. So if the flight's been delayed, you're not going to ask the bot, has it been delayed, has it been delayed? It needs to be able to tell you. A long-running task, so you've kicked off a build, you need to know when the build's finished. So again, it needs to be able to tell you indeterminate time. And then if you hand it off to a human, this is a bit of an edge case, but we can use proactive messaging to basically get into that loop, right? So that we kind of interrupt the bot and we use the proactive messaging to put a human in there and provide responses outside the context of the bot. So that's the example I want to talk through. So if you think we've got an application here, a bot, which is doing customer support. 99% of the cases will go to this service up here and they'll be able to be answered. So this is kind of business as usual. So a user asks the bot a question and the bot is able to automatically respond to it. But if the bot doesn't know the answer, we need to be able to kind of asynchronously deal with that, provide a human response. So the way we do that is the bot application can create something called a conversation reference. It's a cookie because it used to be called a resumption cookie. And that conversation reference can basically be used. You store that in a database somewhere, and it can be used to proactively kind of initialize a conversation. Once we've got that reference, we can then, you know, have some kind of human workflow there, and then provide a response back to the user. Okay, so let's have a look at that and see how it works. So we're going to use the Q&A sample that we looked at before, but I'm going to ask it a question that it doesn't know the answer to, and we'll see what it does in that scenario. So I'll just explain what we've got. We've got a bot. Which is basically using the Q&A middleware, right? So we've got Q&A middleware configured in the same way as the previous demo. So we've got knowledge base hosted an endpoint. So wherever possible, the Q&A maker is going to deal with it automatically. If the Q&A maker isn't able to deal with it, we come into here and we create this conversation reference. Now for demo, I'm just going to save that to disk, so you can see that. But you know, in production, in a real application, you save this to a DB or something. You save it somewhere else. You wouldn't save it just to disk. And then all I'm doing is basically sending a message back, and I'm just generating a hash there just to say your reference number is this. Okay. So if I just run this now, oops. Oh no. Hopefully, oh no. It's still going, isn't it? Let me kill all these. Okay, so just jump back in. I might just have to explain this one if this one doesn't work. I don't want to keep you guys here all night. But the principle is basically we save that cookie to disk, and then we can use that to resume it. So I've talked about the saving bit. I'll explain the resuming in a minute. Hopefully that works. Okay, that looks okay. So that is running on 44376. So if I say, how do I log in, for example? Sorry, how do I log in? It should know the answer to that. Yeah. But if I ask it a question that it doesn't know the answer to, like, how do I install Office? So it's basically saying, I don't know how to answer it. We'll get someone to look into it, and here's a reference number. So what that's done is that's basically saved that file to saved it to disk. If I can just have a look in there. Oops. So in here we've got this resume JSON file, and basically this has all the information it needs to create a new instance or create an activity that we can attach to that conversation. So we've got things like the activity ID, the information about the user, who the bot is, the conversation ID, and so on, and which channel it came across. So all that information is stored within there. You don't need to worry about saving it. So to kind of do the other bit, so imagine someone's doing some investigation now, trying to answer this for this person. So once they've done their work, I've just to simulate that, I've just created a controller here. Oops. And this is just going to accept a HTTP post. So imagine you've got like a support system where you get the support call logged, and you can answer it and then do a post with the answer back to this controller. And all this is doing, again, you do this using some kind of more production-ready storage. But all we're doing is reading this resumption cookie, reading it from disk, deserializing it, and then using it basically to create a reply, right? So responding through the same channel as the user sent the message on. So if I run that again, and then I've got a curl command I can run. So all I'm going to do is just do a curl post. I'm going to post JSON, and that's my payload basically. Go to portaloffice.com and log in as your user. So if I just run that from here, that's going to send it, and then if I go back to the emulator, you'll see we've got the response back. It's pulled that out of the conversation, and then it's sent a message back to the same channel. So if you imagine this is quite obviously meaningless in this scenario in the emulator, but if you're on Facebook, you've got hundreds of thousands of users potentially, so you can route things directly to to the person who needs it, as long as you save that conversation reference. Does that make sense? Yeah.
If they close that conversation or anything, does that, can you still respond to it?
It depends on the channel. So different channels have different restrictions. Like Facebook Messenger, I think you can respond within 24 hours without, having them enroll in like a proactive messaging scenario. And all the channels are different. Like some channels don't care. Like Skype, I think will just send it whenever. So it really depends on the channel.
Could you set that to create something like a ticket if you had a support system?
Yeah.
So you don't have to just produce a JSON?
You'd have to store that JSON somewhere, because you use that JSON to kind of get back to the conversation. So you do have to save it somewhere, but you could just save it to, you could save it to your support system. It could be an extra field in there, and you just stick that JSON in there. The users don't have to see it, but it goes with that particular support call. Yep. Okay, so yeah, sorry I've been rushing through these last ones, but I'm aware I'm kind of overrunning, and you've all been really patient, so I don't want to push my luck. So everything I've done today, I've been using the free tier, so I just want to briefly mention pricing. So bot framework, if you use a standard channels, so Facebook Messenger, Slack, anything, any of those icons that were public, that had public APIs, are considered standard channels. If you want to create your own channel, if you want to, let's say you've got your own chat application that you want to connect bot framework up to, that's considered a premium channel. It uses something called direct line, and you do pay a cost for that. You'd need a S1 tier, and actually I think I've got that the wrong way around, which is 37 pence per 1,000 messages. But most people don't even need that, so most people are fine with the standard. Q&A Maker, again, is there's a free tier. So Q&A Maker is completely free if you just want to use if you want to use up to 3 knowledge bases. You do need to be aware that you'd have to pay the underlying app service cost, because this runs on a Azure app service, and the Azure search cost as well. It's not much. I mean, it's pence a month, but it's something to be aware of. And then finally, Lewis, if you're using Lewis, the free tier, you get 10,000 requests, which is a fair amount of requests, but it's not difficult to go over there. And then you're paying about £1 per 1,000 transactions. So you'd have to do some volume analysis to work out how much this was going to cost you. And that's it, I'm done. So my call to you guys is to download the emulator in the SDK, and use all the knowledge that you have to provide a conversational interface to it. And, I'm excited to see what you can do. And the code, if you want to look it up, is on the bottom.
Do you have to use Azure? Can you determine something without doing?
So you have to use Azure for the channel registration, but for everything else you can use whatever you want. You can host it on premise. You can host it in AWS if you want, but you have to use Azure for the channel registration, which is the bit that connects it to Facebook or Slack or whatever. Yeah. Yep.
In the first demo, what was the name of the reverse proxy that you used?
Ngrok.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheers.
I enjoyed that. We're going to have a drink in Brewery Tap if anyone fancies a bit of a chat later on.